Alright, so unexpectedly Toei has dropped the first 5 minutes to the beginning of the new film to celebrate 1 million people in Japan seeing the new release, and it brought quite an unexpected surprise. But let's get some stuff out of the way first. A number of people have been arguing over whether this is 2D or 3D. The key animator, animation supervisor, and character designer for this film, as well as working in other departments if his workload wasn't large enough, confirmed on Twitter that this is his work, his drawings, it's not 3D. Even outside of that, the smoke effects, the mini Atano circus, crazy camera work and timing all points to him. And on that note, this also presents one really cool aspect of long-running series, is that it provides the opportunity to see fans who were inspired by and grew up watching these shows eventually get to work on them and sometimes beside the very animators they look up to. Coincidentally enough, the current video I'm doing on Naruto, you see just that, with Hiroyuki Yamashita being a big Naruto fan and getting to work alongside industry legends like Norio Matsumoto. And here it's a similar case. Kubota was attached to the series before it even had its anime adaptation, and still is an unapologetic Dragon Ball superfan to this day. Even when he met with One Punch Man's Yusuke Murata, he couldn't help but bring up the series and his passion for it, something Murata recently noted on Twitter after likewise being blown away by his work here, saying, quote, "I got to see the great Dragon Ball that I had always wanted." Anyway, after seeing the original Dragon Ball anime, Kubota in the 5th grade decided he wanted to pursue a career in animation. In time, as he rose up within the animation industry, he would eventually find himself on the series he loved so much with Dragon Ball Super Broly, as well as within the same year sit side by side with the 2 Dragon Ball animators, now friends, which had inspired him so much in his younger years, Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru and Masaki Sato. And so for Kubota to have the chance to not only reanimate many classic scenes from a series he loves so much, and in particular one scene that was animated by the aforementioned Masaki Sato, but also storyboard and direct, certainly was a special moment, and one that he clearly put a lot of effort into. Anyway though, with that bit of backstory out of the way, let's get to it. We begin with the scene as Goku charges the Red Ribbon Army soldiers, before taking out more including General Blue and Mercenary Tao. Kubota often likes to work with high frame rates, often animating on 1s and 2s, and that is definitely the case in these first 2 cuts, sticking to just 1s. So it looks quite smooth, but also with the wide spacing to the hits, fast. Using wide spacing in a scene like this also gives a nice snap to the blows, and the camera pan gives you a moment to take it all in. Good variety of expressions as well. One extra detail Kubota added was how the pole keeps its glow. In the original, it only kind of briefly lights up as it extends. However, for this scene, it works well in giving clarity as the color palette uses a lot of muted tones, so there's a clear contrast between it, the soldiers, and the environment. It makes it easy for the audience to track despite its speed. On the other hand, using the darker tone it was originally presented with wouldn't have that same effect. Coincidentally, actually, when Masahiro Shimanuki reanimated this scene in the 2000s, he kept that glow as well. The framing is also a clear reference to the manga, as is much of this storyboard. I will say I like the dynamic perspective in Daisuke Nishio's board for the original animated cut a little more, who also coincidentally received a special thanks in the credits for this film, which is interesting, but it's definitely a cool throwback to the manga. The next cuts go by pretty quick as well, but are packed with detail and impact. For this one, again it's smooth timing and quick impacts. The force as Goku makes contact is the main highlight. The whole canopy bends in, with multiple other parts coming towards him and the metal sheeting ripping up. Kubota's definitely experienced with drawing mecha, and that experience shows with the mechanical design here, such as like with the circuits being exposed. The following cuts, it's quite inspired by Dragon Ball's usual style of action animation. There's impact frames and long holds on contact with dramatic expressions, but with a bit of modern flair, as you get one of the best impact frames in this trailer as Goku kicks away the bomb with this Inki Nakamura inspired frame. Of course, that was a fair bit of action, so it's necessary to slow it down a bit with some stills as the narrator talks in the back. And this pan up with all the drawings of the various Red Ribbon Army villains really caught me. It's so great to see new drawings of these old characters and in the original rounded Dragon Ball art style. I love the original series, it's where I started the story, and still all these years later, despite the multiple shows I've watched, it easily sits as one of my favorites. And I never thought you would ever see in this era, or any for that matter, for that old style to return as faithfully as it has here. Whenever old scenes are reanimated, whether throughout the 2000s with video game intros, and even with Dragon Ball GT, which I've mentioned before, whenever you have flashbacks, they would always draw these moments in the series' current style, which isn't surprising, but even with the movies such as Dragon Ball Path to Power, the character designer Tadayoshi Yamamoto applied his current style to the designs. Of course, that doesn't mean those drawings are instantly bad whatsoever, and they hold a lot of charm in their own right. but this is definitely my favourite approach. I've also said it before that Kubota is very underappreciated when it comes to drawing upon Dragon Ball's past designs, whether it be the mid-90s with Tadayoshi Yamamura's or Toriyama's early style in the manga. He can do it, and I would argue it's even closer than Minoru Maeda ever was, and is just as good as Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru or Masaki Sato in that area. If anything, I would say he's even a little more consistent than even them in terms of replicating the later arcs. Their earlier work, of course, it's one-to-one, but down the line both Nakatsuru's and Sato's work adopted a more wider and rounded look to faces. We went over a little bit of that in the last video, whereas Toriyama was getting more sharper and angular, and that's what Kubota leans into when depicting those later arcs, as we'll soon get to. And his skill actually also reminds me a bit of Fenyo, who likewise can pull from any era like it's nothing. Now with that said, I don't believe that sticking to the style of the manga is the be-all and end-all, even though I love it when an animator can, but it's more so to point out to the people who think that for Dragon Ball to look like Dragon Ball again, it needs Minoru Maeda back, which is not really the case. In reality, there are plenty of talented artists in this generation who understand Dragon Ball's past designs, and Kubota is a shining example. Even back with the original series, it was thanks to new talents being brought on that the look of the series improved and drew closer to the manga, such as with Maeda himself, who brought on a new and young animator at the time, Masaki Sato, who ended up being more successful in channeling Toriyama's work than he was, and is a large reason Maeda's episodes looked as good as they did. And it's why I'm very excited to have Kubota on board, and he honestly deserves all the newfound praise. Now getting back to the animation, sorry for a bit of that ramble, we come up to one of the most complex cuts in this opening that I honestly mistook for CG at first, with this camera work of Goku darting between buildings. Here Kubota's main emphasis is smooth continuous motion and energy. Jumping like from cut to cut as Goku flies past just wouldn't have that same effect, and so it's his camera work that drives it as well as his timing. With the camera always moving, it gives excitement as well as with the perspectives it provides, and with the rapid bursts of explosions, surprise as the stream of rockets explode all around. Kubota's always been a fan of bringing in the classic Itano circus, which is a very stylized way of animating projectiles taken from Ichiro Itano, with erratic flight patterns and overload through the sheer amount of projectiles. His bombastic effects work equally falls under the same banner of being consistently implemented throughout his work. Their standout trait is how densely explosions are packed with detail, in terms of shading and the number of clouds, but most of all the very scale to them. But as fast and impressive as this looks, it's equally as difficult to animate. Dealing with characters in a fixed frame is one thing, and adding background animation to the equation is another, but working with buildings while also animating on ones and drawing rockets coming in from every direction, and maintaining consistency between drawings throughout this whole cut is phenomenal. And this cut is the defining trait of why this opening has resonated with so many fans. It's this blend of an old school aesthetic with modern traits throughout, such as more advanced camera work. Now, despite being on the ground in the next cut with Goku and Commander Black, Kubota keeps up the pace of very fast actions and camera movement throughout. Perhaps a little hard to all take in the first time you're watching though, but definitely intentional. The emphasis again is energy from the continuous motion. Next cut we come to is the conclusion of the battle. One detail that makes this stand out to previous takes on this moment is how he adds life to the mecha. Again, that past experience with shows like Gurren Lagann comes in handy. His approach is to make it feel alive and represent the desperation the user feels, rather than sticking to rigid stills or linear motion. Now, in terms of animation, there's nothing much else to detail for the rest of this opening, with perhaps exception to that speedy kick Vegeta does into Cell. It's a little different in style from his previous cuts, with the emphasis on strong poses and spacing, although very in line with his Studio Trigger origins. But for the most part, with the rest of the opening, there's more so a focus on atmosphere above all, and with that slowing the pace down and relying on direction and drawings to pull the weight. And it's certainly effective, flicking to fiery backdrops and covering everything in orange and reddish hues. The storyboard also includes a reference to the Dragon Ball Z anime, specifically its opening, which again shows how much of a Dragon Ball fan he is. Really cool detail. And finally, there's the countless manga references. Going side by side, it's a lot of fun, and putting it particularly beside Masaki Sato's is quite interesting. His take is actually slightly rounded when you put them together in terms of line to the ears and eyes, and just generally like with a lot more volume to the various features. Kubota goes towards the more thin, pointed and narrow looks, such as with the brows and ears. Eyes are also longer in width. Both are interesting takes, really great drawings. But yeah, anyway, with that, that's my final note I'll leave you with though. And let me know in the comments your thoughts. Also, I'd really appreciate if you could check out my Patreon so I can continue to make content like this. But with that, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.